make them all during the day and then sit down and watch Murder, She Wrote and take your papers off. And here's my finished economy block. Hello, I am glad you're here. I'm Nikki and this is Pin Cut Sew, and today I'm going to teach you how to do foundation paper piecing. This, like I mentioned in last week's video of quilts I want to make, paper piecing is something I have always loved to do. I didn't do it for a long time because my mom doesn't like to do it, and so I assumed I wouldn't like it, but I actually really love paper piecing. This is totally different from the English paper piecing that is the templates with the hand stitches. Like I made the hexagon flowers that I ran out of steam for after making 11 and turned them into a different quilt. This actually uses paper. So you use a foundation like this and you sew onto the paper. And I think a lot of people don't try it because it feels very abstract. But once you see it done, I think you'll understand that it's very simple and really fun because you can make really intricate designs with it. And that's, I think, the benefit of it, is that rather than trying to piece lots of little accurate tiny pieces, you can make really interesting shapes with exactly precise lines. So that's what we're gonna do today. I almost taught you how to do this using this mug pattern that I've been working on. I've made 2 mugs now. The first was very simple. The second was very complicated, and so I decided I wouldn't say this is a beginner friendly pattern. I am going to link to this because I do like it. I'm going to make 3 mugs and make them into a laptop sleeve, which I will be making a tutorial and a pattern for, don't worry. But for purposes of teaching, I decided to make this free. This is called an economy block. I'll put it over here, can you see? An economy block is a really traditional quilt block, and there's several different ways you can make it, but we're gonna learn paper piecing with this block. So you can actually hop over to my shop. I'll put the link in the very first part of the description. It's just in my shop for $0. So you can go grab this and print out as many economy block templates as you want. And also, before we start, I want to address the idea of doing this with freezer paper, which is becoming more popular recently. And there's pros and cons. I think people like to use it. It's like a freezer paper irons onto your fabric so it kind of sticks. And then you can eliminate having to tear the paper away. You just fold the freezer paper back, stitch, and then you can reuse the template over and over. I think that is a good practice for like bigger, very simple blocks like this. But when you're getting into really intricate paper piecing like this, it's really not gonna work. And so the benefit would be that you can reuse the template over and over, and you can use a regular stitch length instead of, like you'll see, we're gonna lower our stitch length to like 1. But the idea that it's less fussy somehow, I totally disagree with. I think the paper eliminates the fussiness because you don't have to be so precise or careful. And I don't actually think that tearing the paper away is fussy. So if that's the only step that someone thinks is fussy, I don't really think that it's less work to use freezer paper. But if you want to use freezer paper, there's plenty of great tutorials out there for that method too. But we're gonna use paper. Let's get started. Okay, so once you have your paper piecing template, you can sort of cut around it. You don't need to be exact. Some templates do include the seam allowance and some don't. So be aware of that for whatever you're using. When you print this out, you want to make sure it's printed at 100% scale on your printer settings, especially if you need it to fit into something that is, or if you need it to fit into a different block or something. This is designed to be a 6-inch finished block, which is pretty common for an economy block. They're usually 4, 6, or sometimes 8. Okay, so what you need to do is choose a centerpiece. I'm going to pick one of these tigers, and let's see, a glow board. I mean, a light board is not totally necessary. If you don't have one, don't worry. I really love this one from Caterpillar, and you can use the discount code PINCUTSEW on Caterpillar's website to get a discount if you're interested in this. But it's also a cutting board, so that's really nice. And the reason you might want one is because you want to be able to see through your fabric in order to cut your centerpiece if you're using a picture like this. So I'm going to cut my tiger out. I'm going to cut this one out. Just cut it bigger than it needs to be. And I'm going to flip it over because I want the pretty side to be showing when I flip it like this. So you're always going to sew pretty side to pretty side. And if you're doing a pattern like like the mugs, when you print out this pattern, it's gonna be a mirror image because your block ends up being the back side. Okay, so I have my back side of my fabric. I'm going to center my center square over it. You can see it's labeled number 1, so that's what we cut first. I'm gonna have to cut his tail off. And I'm going to get my glue stick, hopefully. Oh good, it's right here. Always losing stuff. I'm just going to put a dab of glue right here in the middle to hold my tiger in place. Now I think I want this fabric to be next. The cool thing about paper piecing too is that you can use directional fabrics and you can easily position them how you want them to go. So I'm just gonna cut some pieces. The key with paper piecing, just like improv quilting, is to just make them bigger than they need to be, because unless you have superior spatial intelligence, unlike me, I do not have superior spatial intelligence, then it can be hard to gauge when you flip it how it's gonna look. So we're going to place the next fabric pretty side to pretty side, and let's see, let's make a straight edge for the purpose of instruction along one of my scalloped lines. And I'm going to place, here's number 2. I can see through both fabrics, and I want to place this line on one of the lines on my striped fabric. So let me try to get it pretty exact. So the seam allowance side is going to be in number 2, while the bulk of the fabric will be facing downward, this direction. You just want to make sure your piece is big enough so that when you flip it, it's going to cover all of space number 2. So I'm going to position this correctly. If you're not using a stripe, you don't have to be so exact, but you want to just make sure you have enough overhang here. And if you don't have a light board, hold it up to a window to make sure that you have seam allowance. Okay, so I'm going to stick a spot of glue to hold it in place. And I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine. And when I sew it, I'm going to sew exactly from this corner to this corner. So I'm sewing on this line. And because I need to be able to tear my paper away later, I'm going to lower my stitch length to a stitch length of 1. Okay, I'm going to turn off my light board for most of this tutorial because I know it doesn't film very well. Okay, so here I go over to my sewing machine. Okay, I'm inserting the paper. I'm going to make sure my needle comes down right in the corner. Lower my stitch length to 1. There we go. I sewed right along the line. Okay, I did the next step and realized my camera wasn't filming, so I'm going to recreate this for you. So I sewed along my line. I'm going to fold this paper back on the line and trim the excess fabric off 1/4 inch from the fold, which I did. So that is a scrap now. And then I'm going to open this up and press it so the seam is nice and neat, and make sure at this point that the number 2 lines are covered by this piece of fabric. So if your fabric were landing over here and you have this tip that's not covered of the number 2 triangle, then you need to redo. So this is why we make it bigger than we think, so we make sure we don't have to do so much redoing. The drawback to having such a tiny stitch length is that it is kind of a pain to unsew, but it can be done, so don't worry if you mess up. Okay, so next I'm gonna sew on number 3. So I'm gonna cut off another square. I actually think since my fabric has diagonal lines, I'm gonna see if I can do it this way. Do I trust myself? Okay, now I'm going to line my next line up with plenty of seam allowance overhanging, making sure my fabric's gonna be big enough to cover the 3 triangle, and it will be. Make sure it's straight. Oops, put a little dot of glue and go sew the next line. Okay, I sewed on the line. You might have a question about back stitching. Sometimes when I'm doing very tiny pieces, I do back stitch to make sure that when I tear off the paper, it doesn't come apart. But for this size of pattern, I am not back stitching. Okay, trim that off, turn her over, and press. So there's my second line. My second section, and it does cover the number 3 triangle lines, which is what I want. So next I will put on number 4. I just like to fold it on the line to make sure that my stripes are going to be straight. If you're not using stripes, it's not that big of a deal. Okay, center it, dot of glue, and go stitch number 4. Trimmy trim and open out. See how the excess blue is getting trimmed away as we go? That same thing's gonna happen to these red ones too. Last corner for this level. Hopefully I made this one big enough. Sometimes the shapes get really abstract and it can be really difficult to tell if something's going to fit. So that's something that just takes practice. I saw a tip recently actually that if you just use the huge fabric, like I would just use this whole thing and like, I mean my stripes on the diagonal, but just place the piece here or this way. And then when you fold it out, you just cut off exactly what you need. And that kind of makes sense to me. But I'm using kind of specific stripes and I want them to go the same direction. So it won't work for this. Okay, so I have my next piece placed. I'm gonna go stitch on my number 5 line. Fold this back, trim it away, and press. So you can see on the back how it's coming together and looking. Isn't this fun? It's fun, right? Okay, this will be my final fabric, I think. And again, I have kind of a directional print here. So I want to make sure that these dots kind of, because they're sort of in lines, you know, but maybe I will try that method. If I straighten this, so it's on one straight line of dashes, and then let's see. If I use this as my straight edge, I'm gonna do number 6. So again, pretty side to pretty side, always right sides together. If I line this up nicely, let's see if this creates a little bit less waste. Oh, whoops, that's not a 6, it's a 9. No, it is a 6. Okay, so I'm gonna go stitch this on using this whole chunk of fabric. Fold this back. Let's just trim here. On this one I actually did backstitch because it's going to be the edge of the block, and you know the more blocks are handled, sometimes they come apart over time, especially if you're not going to put them in a quilt right away. Okay, now you're about to see the beauty of paper piecing. When I open this up, I have this absolutely perfect corner right here. So you can imagine when you're making a very intricate design, I have this one pattern, it's Christmas cottages, and I made them, they're little stuffed like sachets or ornaments. I made them for Christmas gifts a few years ago and I love that pattern. I'll make sure and link to it. But you put little like critters and creatures in the doors and windows or characters, and it's just, you have to be very precise. So you can see how this is a great method for that. So I'm not ready to trim my whole piece yet, so I'm just gonna trim it off like this. And that worked pretty well. All right, so I'm gonna do that again with this side. Let's see, number 7 is next. Whoops, I almost got it backwards. Pretty side to pretty side. Make sure my stripe is straight. And you're sewing through all the layers at this point because they get trimmed after you sew each seam. I'm gonna go sew this one next. Okay, don't forget to trim. Always trim before you fold the fabric into place, or else you'll cut off your piece. Now fold it out and cut it off. And then go get a new camera battery because this one's about to die. Right, I actually do think that method helped conserve fabric. Still have a lot of this left. So that actually was a great tip I saw on Instagram, I think. Okay, so now you can still see it looks a little messy, right? So we have to trim it. Like I said, some patterns do come with seam allowance lines and others don't. So be aware of that. And make sure that if your pattern doesn't have seam allowance lines, that your fabric pieces are big enough to extend at least 1/4 inch past the pattern lines so that you have enough to cut off 1/4 inch away. And so a lot of paper piecing patterns have more than one piece to them because some intricate designs, you know, like the mug, you would have to make the handle and the mug separately and then sew those pieces together. I'll show you what I mean in a sec. But let's finish this first. Okay, so I trimmed it. It looks beautiful. I have extended past my corners so that when I sew this to another piece with a 1/4 inch seam, my corners will be perfect. And some economy blocks don't have these perfect corners, but I really prefer them. I think they look really nice with perfect corners and not corners that get chopped off. I like this method for better precision. Okay, so now all you do is tear the paper away. And because your seam allowance was so small, it comes right off. Sometimes teeny tiny pieces, you might need some tweezers or something, but I really don't ever find it to be a big problem. And it's really not challenging. You can even just do this part while you watch TV. So make them all during the day and then sit down and watch Murder, She Wrote and take your papers off. And here's my finished economy block. It's so cute. I really love this fabric. I think it's I got it on clearance yesterday at my quilt store. It's called Jessica Smith Angles? Tall in? I don't know. Anyway, it's Art Gallery by Jessica Swift. Did I say Smith? I meant Swift. Okay, so that is how you do basic paper piecing. And you'll come across some patterns, like I said, that have multiple pieces. So these mugs that I'm making, she has, see how you make the A section and then you make the B section and then attach C and D. So the key to paper piecing anything, even if it looks complicated like this, is to just follow the correct order. So you make A, then B, and you make A 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you just do it in the right order. Trust the process, keep trimming, and it will turn out exactly how it's supposed to. So I hope this has been helpful for you. I hope you're inspired to try some paper piecing. I'm gonna put some links to some really great paper piecing pattern designers on Etsy that I follow on Instagram that I think you might really enjoy some stuff from their shop. I know one is, I think, Burlap and Blossom. And yeah, there's more though, and I will make a list and I'll link them for you in the description. So let me know if you're gonna try it, or if you have any other helpful tips like that one of using the whole fabric. That was a good tip. And if you make some of these and put them together into a quilt, I would really love to see it. So you can send that to me via email or tag me on Instagram, and I will see you guys very soon. Bye.